Hello everybody, SlimKirby here, and I'm going on a long journey of trying to complete every single Game Boy Advance game in North America. This is the story of the highs, the lows, and all the silly stuff in between for the Game Boy Advance completion experience. This is GB Ace. Game number 35, Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX 2. Well, after how well Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 went about 20 games ago, I bet you guys were just dying to see how things were going to go with this game, huh? Well, I can most certainly say that feeling was not usual for me. No, not in the slightest bit. Like I said in that previous summary, Skater 2 by itself wasn't a bad game, it just wasn't my kind of game. But I could still at the very least see the appeal to it, because functionally, I thought it was set up in a pretty interesting and unique way. You guys are probably saying though, but Slim, that was skateboarding, this is BMX biking. Surely there's going to be some kind of difference here, right? Well, about that, look at both of these games here. Look at the footage from both of these games and try to tell me, just try to tell me that these games were made with completely different goals in mind. Yeah, that's what I thought. Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX 2 for the Game Boy Advance was released in November of 2001, pretty much alongside the console iterations for the game as well, although the PS2 version released a few months prior. It was published by Acclaim, and although the developers for the console were Z-Axis, this version specifically was developed by Full Fat. And you know what's interesting about that? Those aren't even the same developer or publisher credits for Pro Skater, so neither of these extreme trick sporting games were even handled by the same teams or people involved. At least I think anyway. I honestly didn't look into too much detail of the development history for this game or series, just the basic information, but looking into this game after playing Pro Skater 2, it definitely gives off very big, delightfully devilish Seymour energy. But nah, I get it. This type of game was very popular at the time, so naturally it makes sense to draw heavy inspiration from a formula that works. So really, why wouldn't you? Also, if it wasn't obvious, much like Pro Skater 2, the first Freestyle BMX game was released before the GBA released. So they decided to forego putting that on this system in favor of the engine they were already working on. Which, hey, makes sense, because they were apparently going for a new installment every year type of scenario anyway. The basic completion goal for this game will be drawing the credits after completing the main career mode of this game, in this game referred to as ProQuest. ProQuest is pretty much like the career mode in the Pro Skater games. You pick a professional BMX biker and play through a series of levels, completing objectives for a checklist to unlock more levels until you eventually unlock all the levels and the final challenge, after which, if you complete that challenge, the credits will play and you've officially become a biking legend. So, congratulations. But while the basic workflow of this game was fairly similar to Pro Skater 2, there were at least some slight differences that made this experience a little more unique from our previous bout. For one, ProQuest actually has 3 levels of difficulty, but these difficulties are progressive, in that you have to fully complete each one to unlock the following one. And unfortunately for us, we cannot do the final challenge unless we progress to that final difficulty, essentially making this a 100% run. Something I didn't have to do for Pro Skater 2. So it looks like we are committing to the full Monty this time. However, to this game's credit, I did feel like the difficulty scaled up pretty well, in the sense that we didn't have to do anything too obscurely hard or difficult to reach the different milestone markers for each level of difficulty. Heck, even with Tony Hawk, I didn't fully complete a single level until like 80% through the game, while here, I fully completed my first stage in like 40 minutes. Although it did probably help that I was way more familiar with this type of game by this point as well, but still, my point stands. So let's get this started. Much like Pro Skater 2, I had no idea who any of these BMXers are. Heck, I wouldn't even know of Dave Mirra himself if it wasn't for the game's dang box art in the first place, so I really had no sort of attachment to any of these people. I eventually landed on Tim Mirra, who I later discovered was Dave's brother, so hey, pretty cool that they both were a part of the BMX biking scene. I also discovered that apparently 9 years ago, Dave Mirra actually passed away, so hey, much respect to him and his legacy. I promise anything negative that I say about this game is not a reflection of you as a person, just my saltiness in regards to my incredibly low skill level for this game. So yeah, major skill issue on my behalf, and not on any of these BMX bikers. Oh, and before I get into any more of this, I should probably address this issue right out of the gate, and thank you to my fellow GBA challenger Gilgatex for bringing this to my attention. Apparently this game has an issue where the internal save system can just crap out at any time, an issue that unfortunately came at his expense during his own run of this game for his challenge. So, I went into this game being very prepared for that reality. How exactly? Well, really, I just made a save state before each game save. That way, if something bad happened, I would just reload to that previous state and move on, hoping it wouldn't happen again. I guess that's really all I could do. I made sure to only use these save states for that purpose though, just so I wouldn't have to redo hours and hours of progress, but not heavily indulge in a feature that could be seen as a huge advantage and only use it for safety purposes, even if there were a few times I was tempted to otherwise. So yeah, let's get this pro quest started, shall we? Starting with Amateur mode, the first stage is Cloud 9, a pretty simple and basic BMX stadium with a variety of ramps, half-pipes, and grind rails. And here is our first checklist as well, meaning these are the objectives we must complete to gain points, and remember, more points means more progress through the game, as they will unlock additional stages with even more points to grab, and of course the additional difficulty modes, and getting all the available points in the game will also unlock our final challenge, so yes, we need to do all of these. Most of these objectives will be repeated and carried over to other levels, most notably the first 6 objectives and the final objective, but there will be some course-specific challenges as well. To start, there are 3 objectives related to score. Basically, if you reach a certain point threshold, you complete the objective. It's that simple. In addition to high score, there is also a pro score you have to meet as well, which is naturally higher than the high score. In the case of this first level, it's actually double the high score, but don't worry, with this being the first level, it should be fairly easy to meet if you know what you're doing. Finally, you also have an objective relating to doing a sick trick. Basically, one maneuver or combo of maneuvers that accumulates up to a certain point threshold. The amount you need will usually be a small fraction of what the high scores are in the first place, so don't worry too much about this one, as you will generally get it in addition to the score ones if you make those your general goals for a particular run anyway. The next 3 objectives are collectible objectives. Basically, in each level you can find a set of collectible objects that you have to collect or just touch, and you have to get all of each in order for the credit for that objective to count towards your progress. These collectibles will be 5 cans of spray paint, 5 letters which spell out the word Mirra, and 1 superstar. And yes, you do have to get all of each collectible in one run in order for it to count. You can get 3 Mirra letters, 4 spray paint cans, and the superstar during a run, but you're only getting credit for the star at the end of it all, and if you start a new run, you will have to get the other letters and cans again, even if you did get them previously. These generally aren't too hard to find, at least this early on, and you will usually see them hanging around in the air or on half pipes or in your path if you're making a jump on a ramp of some kind. The next 3 objectives will be level specific, and they'll just be something like grind on a specific rail or number of rails, or make a gap jump, or transfer from one ramp to a different ramp, stuff like that. Some of the objective descriptions can be a little cryptic though, and I admittedly used some guides, both video and text-based ones, to help me whenever something was just not entirely clear to me. Give me a break, I just don't really know these types of games that well. And finally, the last objective, which is also consistent across all levels, is just the objective for, well, clearing all objectives. Once you get all of them done, you get some bonus points as well, so yeah, pretty nice reward I guess. And yes, if it isn't obvious, you don't have to do every single objective in one run at any point during the game. In fact, it may not even be possible in some stages, although I can't say for absolute certainty. So my advice for progressing through this game, Do a few quick runs through the level to start, see if there are any objectives that stand out from the get-go, and familiarize yourself with the item locations. Then do some runs focusing on the collectibles, then runs where you focus on the scores, and lastly, any other objectives you haven't done yet, which you may have actually completed some of those in the process of taking care of the other stuff. Then, once you're done with all of that, you can pretty much move on to the next level. If you unlock the level early before you're done with the objectives, you can freely move on if you want, but remember that you will pretty much need to do every level completely before you unlock the next level of difficulty anyway, so at some point you will get walled unless you do the full clear. Getting to this level's objectives, here is what we have to do for Cloud 9. Now, I'm probably not going to spend too much time on each individual objective because most of these will be fairly brainless, so I'll only mention something if that objective had anything of major note, or just the level in general. In addition to all the score and collectible objectives, we also had to grind the bended rail, grind the 4 linear rails in the center of the stage, and jump the entrance gap. I got the first 2 of these immediately while I was still trying to figure out the controls, also managing to get the sick bonus in addition to the Mirra letters as well, so a pretty good first run all things considered. Not long after that, I got the spray paint can objective, and the other 2 score objectives as well, using the Cloud 9 rails from the earlier objective as a base for getting my points, since you get bonus points for utilizing those, especially considering they are 4 back-to-back rails as well. The last 2 objectives took me a while though. I had located the star, but I was in a very awkward and high location, and I still had no idea what the entrance gap was either. I seriously spent like 20 additional minutes on this stage just trying to figure out how to get these. I eventually found the path to the star by landing on a rail high up, but I had a problem where whenever I landed on it, I would just have no speed or momentum to move, so I'd just be stuck there until I stopped pressing the grind button or lost my balance, being unable to move in any one direction. I realized that you have to move more at an angle when doing this, just so you have that momentum, but even then, it was still really hard to do, especially this early on when I didn't really have many stats to my name either. I eventually got the star and then only had to get the entrance gap at that point, which after using a guide, I was able to locate easily. It's just at the back of the level and you just do a simple ramp transfer. After that run, all of my objectives were done, so on to the next level we go. We can now head to the local park located in Brooklyn, but before we do, one thing to mention. Like I said before, you can upgrade your stats in this game, much like in Tony Hawk 2. But in order to do this, it's not as simple as using your points to buy your upgrades. In this game, you just get a static 3 upgrade points whenever you unlock a new level. I guess a more simplistic way to get the job done. However, while simplistic, this does come at a cost, because getting these upgrades will not be as common as they were before the later you get into the game, and unlike Tony Hawk 2, you won't be able to max out your character in this game either. This is actually kind of problematic, because if for some reason your character doesn't have enough of one stat, a stat that could potentially be necessary for getting an objective of some kind, you may have a really tough time getting some of the later game objectives, just warning you of that right now. I guess as a rule of thumb, try to max out your speed and air as soon as possible, and try to keep everything else balanced with probably a lesser emphasis on spin. That's at least what the guides I looked at trying to emphasize anyway. It really sucks though that the devs didn't allow for a way for you to reallocate your points though if you made a mistake or found yourself needing a slightly different distribution. Since if you're unlucky, you could find yourself with a dead softlock game, and that's never fun. Getting back to the level, these are the objectives we have this time. In addition to the 7 regulars, we also have to grind the 4 fountain rails, make 2 courtyard transfers, and perform the lifeguard jump. The fountain rails were easy as they were literally right in front of where you start the stage, so that one was a no-brainer. I also found that the superstar was incredibly free in this stage as well, which is funny because the single unique collectible in the Tony Hawk games, which was the tape, always seemed to be in a very obscure and difficult location to reach, so they really mellowed out on the star for this game. In fact, I actually got that before I even got the letters and spray paint cans. Also, during one of my runs, I got the lifeguard jump as well, but I don't exactly know how, since I don't think the notification popped up at all. Although, funnily enough, I think it was because I literally performed it as the timer ran out, so the game didn't give me the pop-up, but still triggered that it was successful, so that was a relief, I guess. Not that it really matters, since you pretty much get this one going for one of the spray paint cans anyway. You just have to jump from that one ramp into the swimming pool. And for the courtyard transfers, you guessed it, just go to the courtyard and do 2 transfers. That's simple. It actually took me a while to get the Mirra letters and spray paint cans, but really just because this was a huge stage, and they had you traversing quite a bit of the level just to get all of them. So it makes sense that they were able to elude me as I was doing all these other objectives. The score objectives took me much longer though, as I was still having some trouble adjusting to the controls of this game. It had been a couple of months since Tony Hawk 2, and I don't know, I feel like the controls were a lot less responsive here, particularly when trying to grind multiple rails in succession, which is what I tried to do for most of my points here to begin with. It took several attempts, but after a while, I was starting to get it. It did get me a little worried about future score challenges though, not gonna lie. The warehouse level was next, and you know what was actually kinda cool? After having a bit of trouble with these score objectives in the last level, I had a bit of a breakthrough here. Did you see that? I've already got the scores. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. Once again, I have discovered cheese for a game I was having a rough time playing. You gotta love to see that when it happens, believe me. Basically, using a combination of quick button tapping, I could do very simple hops on a grind rail, build up a combo of very small point denominations, and when I reached the appropriate threshold, I'd just stop and let the points add up, turning a simple 2,000 point maneuver into a near 40,000 one with a nice 20x multiplier. And trust me, you can take it further than that too, so this pretty much makes any score achievement trivial for the rest of the game. Yeah, it's cheap, but I don't care. I was starting to notice though that as my character got faster, the perspective of this game was really messing with me though. Sometimes it seems so hard to do something as simple as land on a grind rail you were trying to use, or trying to locate where exactly a collectible was in the air. For the latter, there were shadows, but I swear, later on it felt pretty deceptive to me. As a result, it took me a while to get everything else here, but this was easily the shortest stage so far, as I was literally here for only like 20 minutes at most. And for the stage objectives, all I had to do was grind the 3 cargo rails, make a transfer from one truck ramp to the other side, and make a gap jump from on top of the truck, which I'm not sure how or why this counted, since I clearly wiped out here, but hey, the big bolded letters never lie, so I'm taking it. After beating this stage, we get the notification that we have cleared amateur mode, and now get to move on to the pro mode, meaning we can now earn more points and get more stages. Of course though, this means we have to revisit the 3 stages we already completed, and they will have new objectives to get this time. Heck, the collectibles even get some new locations, and as you might expect, the high scores are even higher now too, so yeah, we're going to need to step up our game a little, huh? Oh, also, the game gives you 30 extra seconds for objectives now too. Not a whole lot of extra time, but I suppose knowing what I know now about some of the future objectives, yeah, it's probably for the best. So we head back to Cloud 9 for round 2, and looking back at it now, I don't feel like the new objectives were really that bad. However, I do think this was where I was really starting to notice where my growing frustrations with this game were starting to stem from with the game's controls and general perspective. And this became very apparent with the collectibles. Sometimes it's really hard to get a good idea of positioning and where certain things are located. Furthermore, due to the isometric view, lining yourself up with stuff can be rather difficult. One, because the general direction of ramps and jumps will not be laid out in an up, down, right, left fashion, but more diagonally in an up, right, down, down, left, up, left fashion. And since the bicycle is always moving, any slight adjustment could throw you off your line and cause you to miss your mark if you aren't careful. Another thing I had a problem with was figuring out the right timing for when I wanted to use a half-pipe ramp to trick off of, or in most cases do a transfer, versus when I wanted to jump over and out of the half-pipe to get to that higher or just another section in general. In the latter's case, you honestly only need to hold forward as you're going up the incline and you'll pop right over, but sometimes I found myself moving forward even when I wanted to just do tricks to get more air, particularly when performing transfers, and I couldn't quite figure out why it was doing that. It probably had to do with when I was pressing the jump button as well, as that's a factor for getting more air, but the game was never really 100% clear on that, to be honest. So it was a hard thing to gauge for me. I know one of the collectibles I struggled with for the longest time on this stage was one of the Mirra letters, just because it really wasn't that high up, but you had to go over the ramp, not trick off of it to get it, but also do so while getting some air in the process. So it felt like I had to hold forward on the D-pad while also jumping, which felt very counterintuitive to how this game was working so far. Aside from those quirks though, like I said, I wouldn't say the objectives were that difficult overall, but they definitely start getting you used to what to expect moving forward. One thing you shouldn't have to worry about are the point objectives though. Yeah, like I said, they are pretty much trivial now based on what I found, so thank God for that. Those are now 3 easy objectives I can just pick up whenever I'm ready for them. And as far as the new stage specific objectives, not counting the location of the new collectibles, we now have to grind the 2 high rails, really not that hard considering I think I even did that in the first rendition of this stage. We have to perform a crazy transfer, basically transferring from a quarter ramp into the ramp in the pool, basically the same process as any other transfer. And finally we had to do the long jump. I also struggled on this objective too, just because I didn't know what jump they were referring to. I thought it had to do with jumping from the higher section to a lone platform on the lower section, or even to the ramp on the decline of that platform, but it either wasn't working or just felt out of my reach. After watching the video though, I realized I was just doing this on the wrong side, so hey, way to go me. With that objective finally completed, it was finally time to move on to the next stage. We head back to Local Park, and this stage was honestly not too much more difficult, though I probably took longer on it than I should have. The collectibles aren't in 2 tough locations, and even most of the unique objectives were pretty fair, one involving jumping out of the pool and over the brick wall, and another simply just jumping over the fountain and landing on one of the fountain rails. However, the final special objective was a bit difficult for a couple of reasons. In the courtyard, the same one we had to do transfers on the last time we were here, features another objective where you pretty much do the same thing. However, this time you have to actually do all 4 of the transfers. There are 6 ramps, and you basically need to make a successful transfer between the middle ones and the ones on the left and right of that middle ramp. 2 of these transfers are pretty free, but for the other 2, the distance is a lot greater, so it's harder to make the landing without a lot of speed, and again, assuming the game physics don't screw up on you. In addition to that, though, I think you also need to do all 4 of these consecutively. In other words, complete each transfer without repeating any of the ones you've already done, as there were times where I didn't get the credit for some reason in my attempts. I think you can still wipe out and try again, it's more so just completing them all without repeats, but not 100% sure as it seemed kind of finicky. Eventually, I got it though, and was finally able to move on. I headed back to the warehouse, but funnily enough, I wasn't here for very long, as the objectives only took me 20 minutes to complete. This level does get a rather interesting addition though, as it implements a secondary sub-area that you can now enter, and these sub-areas will more than likely have some of the objectives and collectibles you need to progress. So, in addition to that first section with the truck that you'll have to scan through, you'll also need to look at the other area as well, which features a bunch of heavy containers and even a train you can jump over. For special objectives though, there isn't really a lot to write home about. You just have to transfer the ramps in the upper section of the first area, do some box jumps over the containers in the second area, and also do some docking maneuvers over the train, which I believe means you just have to make a successful jump over the train without touching it. I think anyway. Honestly, both this and the box jumps were a little cryptic since I unlocked them both without looking at too many specifics. With that level done, we're finally entering some new territory as the high school becomes available. Oh boy, I hope this level isn't as bad as the school level was in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 for GBA. Well, guess what? It wasn't. Yeah, I was done with this level pretty fast too. I guess in some respects this level was a bit easier since this was the first time we were seeing it, so the objectives were probably a little closer to amateur level than pro level. But yeah, the collectibles didn't take me that long, the scores didn't take me that long, and even the unique objectives weren't too bad. Needing to perform a hall pass transfer, which I guess was this, doing some B-average maneuvers across these ramps, and doing some touchdown transfers, which were interesting because since I was going so fast at this point, I had to almost bump against the back wall to weaken my jump so I could land on the other ramp of each structure, which felt kind of odd admittedly. Still worked though. We got one more level of Pro to look through, and this one is called the Titanic. Oh god, if my heart will go on and starts playing while I'm performing these BMX missions, well, honestly, I'm not really sure what I would do. Anyway, the particular stadium is actually a fairly intriguing level with some interesting jumps and maneuvers, although I'd say the pro variation of this isn't too bad. Pretty standard stuff for all the collectibles and points as usual, although it is worth mentioning that one of the letters is located very high up on the largest ramp in the level. It's not too hard to grab, but let's just say I'll have something to say about this later. For the special objectives, we had to have a house party, which I believe was just grinding the tops of 2 adjacent houses, grinding the 5 special rails featured in the level, and then jumping ship, which basically amounted to climbing on top of the biggest half pipe in the level, jumping off of a ramp, and landing on the building while performing a grind maneuver, I think. Maybe you just had to land on a certain point, but it was hard to tell in the moment. After completing all the objectives, we get the message that we had completed Pro Mode, which means we only had one mode left, the Hardcore mode, before we officially get the in-game credits. So, as you might expect, we had to start from the beginning, playing through all the courses we had just played through again. Once again, no real changes to the formula, just different collectible locations, higher score requirements, and slightly different unique objectives, along with some stages getting some additional features, as I'll touch on as we go through this process for a third time. In fact, Cloud 9 actually had a pretty significant change, opening up an additional sub-area we could venture into, and wait a second, this is just the Titanic level again. And now it's a sub-level? Okay then. From this, I was actually kind of wondering if this was going to open up something a bit deeper, like all the levels in the game were somehow connected, like the worlds in Banjo-Tooie, for example. But I'll say it now, this was the only level that was like this. You can't even go back to the Cloud 9 portion when we do the actual Titanic level later, so a very random inclusion here. I guess they just wanted more objectives for this area, apparently. Anyway, for the unique objectives, we had to hop onto the big house, an objective that was probably way more simple than it needed to be, do 4 bingo jumps, which were basically jumping from one of these paired ramp structures onto another one nearest to it, and do a roll in the gap transfer. A transfer that was actually kind of difficult to do just because of the sheer distance between the 2 ramps in question. So, once again, you really need to have a lot of speed to do this. Now, I didn't mention the other objectives yet, and no, it's not just because there's not much to say about them, which has been the case for all the other levels so far. Believe it or not, the collectibles actually get a bit harder on Hardcore mode, and I'll be honest, there was one particular collectible in this level that almost kinda had me questioning if I could actually complete this game on this particular run. I already had an issue with a spray paint can in this level because I thought you had to jump to it from the high platform featured here, but for some reason it just wasn't giving me credit for it, and I couldn't really tell how or why I was missing it, because the shadow of the object seemed like it was lining up properly. However, when I tried jumping diagonally from the nearby ramp, it gave me no problem. Yeah, I have no idea what the hell was up with this. The perspective of this game really does suck sometimes. This was the absolute worst collectible though, as one of the Mirra letters was in the Titanic section at the very large half pipe, and I swear, they put this one really high. You pretty much had to go 25 feet in the air from the top of the ramp, and even when I was trying to add speed, I could only get about 21 or 22 feet in most cases. I tried studying the guide video I was using as a reference alongside with my chat, and it was at this point that one of my viewers pointed out a disclaimer in the video description that stated there was a very strong possibility for your run to get soft locked in this game. This is due to the nature of you not being able to redistribute your stats if you don't upgrade your character in the right way. I thought this was absolute bullshit, but the fact that I was unable to get this letter was really starting to concern me, because yeah, if your speed and air stats aren't that ideal, I don't see any way for you to get this. I stubbornly kept trying this for a while, and I even opted to try a different type of bike as well, to see if that would help push my metrics into a more positive direction. And when things started to look hopeless, I did finally have a run where I got the letter, showing that it was certainly possible, just really difficult. Unfortunately, I didn't quite have enough time to get the other letters though, so I did have to do this again unfortunately, but at least I knew it could be done. Still though, a really bad decision on the game developers' parts for not having a stat redistribution feature, because experiencing a dead game this far into the playthrough would have been way too demoralizing, and probably an automatic 1 for me on the review scale. However, I also wasn't sure if this was even the instance the maker of the guide was talking about, so I kinda just had to press on and find out, hoping I could still make it through and also maybe get 1 or 2 more level ups that could push my stats closer to what they should be and to what the guide maker had laid out. We headed back to the local park after we were finally done with Cloud 9, and thankfully this level was actually a hell of a lot easier than the last one. Heck, even the collectibles seemed 10 times more reasonable, which, hey, definitely a positive for me. For the objectives, we had to grind both monkey bars, which also conveniently feature the location of the star collectible as well, grind the snake rails, which leads into the pool, and then make 2 gap jumps, which this was kinda hard to locate admittedly, but I wouldn't say it was hard to perform, and it was pretty self-explanatory when you get the right location, so we were already back on the train of progress. And what a segue that was, because we're back at the warehouse train station level. This did unfortunately pick up in difficulty again though, as the collectibles were once again kind of obnoxious. More so the fact that they were scattered across both areas though, so you had a lot of ground to cover if you wanted to get all of them. Still not as bad as that one letter in Cloud 9 though. For the unique objectives, we had to grind all 6 box rails, fairly easy to do since they're all like right there. Grind the tunnel rail, which is really just the system of rails at the top of the train station area, and perform the 3 Gomez gap transfers, which, who the hell is Gomez? I have no freaking idea. I'd say the Gomez transfers were probably the hardest aspect of this level though. One of them was fairly easy since it was pretty much along the path of not just the rail transfer, but also in getting the star collectible. However, the others were a lot more tight and once again had the struggle of distance. You really need speed for this if you want to do these properly, so much that I once again switched bikes to make sure I got the clearance I needed to make both, and even then I was just barely missing it. I eventually got them both though, and once again put another level to rest. Before we move on though, there was a pretty interesting moment that happened here during my playthrough that I thought I would share with you, so here it is for your viewing pleasure. See, like, I can't do anything if I just, like, stall right there. What? Heh, I guess Tim Mirra was just as tired of this game as I was and tried out-of-bounds warping to the credits or something, huh? Believe it or not, we're actually only 3 levels from the end, so let's keep up the progress and hopefully we can make it through this final push. We're back at the high school again, and this level was pretty quick the last time we did it, and it probably would have been just as quick this time if it wasn't a week in between sessions of this game. Yeah, the games for this challenge always seem to drag on a bit when that happens, as I have to kind of relearn controls again for like the first hour or so of each stream. But yeah, even with that adjustment, I wouldn't say there was anything out of the ordinary here. One of the collectibles threw me off because I wasn't sure how I was supposed to collect it at first, forgetting that a different collectible was in that spot on a different run, and I just had to remember the exact process for getting it. Silly me. Anyway, for this level, the special objectives were getting straight A transfers, catching the 3 buses, and then riding the miscellaneous senior rails laid across the course, which were like 8 different rails I had to grind. Some of these took a bit to get because it was either hard to remember which ones I had done in each attempt, but also some of them just had some weird activations involved as well. But for the most part, it was still pretty simple. Well, back to the Titanic again, and that prospect kind of worried me after the last time I was here. And by that last time, I mean this area in the Cloud 9 level, because yep, we have another collectible high up in the sky again. Although, I'll say this was a little easier to get, as I did have another level up I could make use of, which increased my stats a bit, allowing me to reach that 25-foot height a little easier this time, thank God. But yeah, thankfully I really wasn't here for that long. Probably the shortest hardcore level in the bunch. This level did feature an additional area which looked like an indoor pool of sorts, but I wouldn't say anything too important was in here, other than some collectibles, as even the unique objectives were still in the main area. Speaking of which, for those objectives we had to grind all the houses, jump the neighbor gap, which I honestly feel like I did by complete accident more than anything, and then grind the 2 Woodward logos on the huge ramp. These logos were a bit finicky though, as you had to basically grind the whole logo and they were already kind of small, so getting credit wasn't exactly free or anything. Overall, I'd say the collectibles were still the hardest part of this level though, but like I said, even they came to me a bit faster than the last time we were here. Okay, it's finally time for a new stage as we have the last normal level for the game, the car park. And my god, this level was hell to play through. Let me set this up for you. There are 4 different areas you have to bike through here, and each area includes a multitude of different things you'll have to accomplish for your objectives. Not just in terms of the collectible ones too, as even some of the transfer objectives have the ramps on differing floors, so there is a lot you have to pay attention to here. Thankfully, the high score challenges are still pretty free though, although this will be the highest number of points you have to aim for, so keep that in mind. But yeah, getting all the collectibles was awful for this stage. The collectibles in the first 3 rooms weren't too bad to get, but when you get to the roof of the car park, oh boy, this was not fun. Let's just say this top floor isn't just 1 roof, it's 4, and you have to basically grind and or jump across the roofs if you want to get everything. And not only do you need the exact momentum, speed, and jump timing to make the trip successfully, you also have to make sure the perspective plays nicely with you too, because some of these things are not very well located, and if you fall off the roof, you basically just void out into the beginning of the room again, wasting time in the process. There was one spray paint can that I swear I could not figure out where this thing was positioned. You would think you would just have to ride the rail around it, but no, trust me, that was one of the first things I tried, and even jumping during the grind didn't work either. You literally had to leap and pray for this one. Also, getting to the roof at the bottom end of the screen, the timing seriously felt frame perfect. Maybe my stats were still a little off, making this a bit harder than it needed to be, but still, it pained me having so many close calls, especially after just landing on this power line was already a chore to begin with. Eventually, I finally pulled everything off, but it did take a while admittedly. And hey, I still have the unique objectives too, but these were actually not too bad, or at least not as bad as the collectibles were. I pretty much had to grind all the rails on the roof that led to different buildings, something I was more than practiced with at that point, performing 4 crazy transfers, which, yeah, by the look of these, they did seem pretty crazy, although this one ramp jump seemed really easy by comparison, so maybe not this one. The final transfer by itself was quite a distance though, but with a little bit of speed on your side, it is definitely makeable, so keep at it. The last objective was finding the stolen cars, which basically means you had to do a stall maneuver on 3 specific cars in the level, and in that case, it's just a matter of going through the whole stage and trying every car until a message pops up. That's simple. And hey, you don't even need to jump the roofs again for this challenge either, so yay for that. With everything done in hardcore mode, we finally unlock the finale of this game. What? There's more? Yeah, there is unfortunately, but thankfully this is a very simple and quick finale. All you have to do here is go off of a giant ramp and perform a bunch of tricks, enough to get a high score of over 20,000 points in one single jump. Now, this maneuver is tricky to pull off, not going to lie, but you essentially have endless attempts, so you'll get it eventually. Something hilarious happened though during this challenge where I somehow landed on the bottom without the stage properly ending, allowing me to kinda ride around a little on the bottom part. However, when you drive back towards the ramp, you magically get warped back on top of the ramp again. Guess a case where the devs didn't exactly playtest for this possibility, huh? But yeah, let's just watch how my successful run went, because let me tell you, it was quite the doozy. Okay, how do I do that, and how do I... It did the same thing again! I gotta try again! I did it! Yes! Oh my god, with a glitched attempt. Okay, well, if there was any way to end this, I'm glad it happened like this. With the finale completed, we finish up ProQuest, drawing the credits as a result, and leading to our game complete. Okay, so, how exactly did I feel about this one? Well, as you know, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 gave me a lot of struggles, and even with how loved those games generally are, it was just really hard for me to vibe with that game, at least in the perspective offered off by a handheld installment. I admittedly still have to try the console versions at some point, but obviously the focal point for this series will be on the GBA, and the unique experiences I have with these games by themselves. And I just did not have a great experience with Tony Hawk. This game is not much better. In fact, I'd almost say this game actually does make Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 look better by comparison, and led to a few instances of me actually kind of wishing I could have played that again instead. Especially now that I know how the game works a bit more and could probably appreciate it on a greater level. Plus, I just felt like that game controlled better than this one. The skateboard just felt more responsive than the bike, and the general perspective was just really hard to follow here at times. In terms of where things were located, or in other cases, needing to line yourself up properly with whatever maneuver you're trying to perform. Tony Hawk just seemed to have a better hold on that, but to be fair, it was also the originator, and this game clearly feels like it took a lot of ideas from that series in the first place, so probably not too surprising overall. I do think this game had the right idea in terms of difficulty progression though. Needing to get all the objectives, but introducing harder ones for each stage once you do promote to the next difficulty was a great way to build your skills throughout the game. And I almost kind of prefer that to Tony Hawk's system, where just everything is open and you can come back throughout the game to clean up if you feel your character isn't quite good enough yet. Being able to take care of everything along the way just made it feel like I had a better handle on keeping my focus on each stage, and I appreciated this take on progression. However, the fact that you could lock yourself out of completing this game by bad stat management, yeah, that was a huge oversight, and one I'm thankful I didn't experience in this run. That honestly would have probably lowered my enjoyment score to a 1 if that did happen, no joke. On the subject of scores, let's get to that so we can finish this up, shall we? For overall quality, I'm giving this a 2 out of 5. There was definitely potential here, but they definitely fumbled in a lot of the technical aspects, and I think overall Tony Hawk 2 was a much better game as a result. I'm also giving a 2 out of 5 for personal enjoyment as well. Still didn't really vibe with this game as much, and if anything, I enjoyed it less than Pro Skater, but I'd say it was at least more decent than some of the worst games I've played for this challenge. And for difficulty, I think I gave it a 3.5 during the playthrough, but I'd say it's more of a 4 out of 5, just due to the controls. Really awkward perspective, and the fact that you can quite literally get a dead game if you aren't careful. And let's not forget the thing I brought up earlier in regards to the save feature also being apparently busted. At least from what I've heard anyway. Maybe that's just an emulator issue, and maybe it doesn't have that problem on the actual cartridge, but still, it was definitely a huge concern for me as I played through this. But yeah, at the end of the day, this can be a rough one to complete, so I think the 4 is pretty justified here. Oh, and before I forget, there are a few other modes for this game as well, but they just seem like general free modes of the stages we played through in ProQuest, where instead of completing objectives, it's more about just getting high scores, or just exploring around the area if you want some leisurely time to do so. Obviously, I didn't mess with these modes, though, but did want to at least point out their existences. Okay, well, that's it for Dave Mirra. For now, anyway. Yeah, there is another Freestyle BMX game for this challenge, although I think it's just one, so after Freestyle BMX 3, we will be done with this series. However, I discovered this a bit later on, but apparently there's also a Pro BMX series as well, featuring the likes of Matt Hoffman, a name that sounds a little more familiar with this medium. And there's also BMX Trick Racer 2, so yeah, we still got some biking left for this challenge, unfortunately. For now, though, let's put up our kickstands and see what the next game is that we have for this challenge. Okay guys, thank you for watching this summary. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to leave a comment and or like on the video, as those will really help me in these videos out. And stay tuned for future summaries of this series. If you also want to watch full playthroughs of these games for this challenge, check out the video description for a full playlist of everything that's been uploaded and exported so far. And if you're curious about what I'm playing right now for the challenge, be sure to stop by my Twitch channel to see what my current progress is. Just be warned, I'll be a lot further ahead of where we are for these summaries, so keep that in mind. This has been SlimKirby in the GBA series, and I'll talk to you fine people next time. Later, folks.